So to begin with, it would be great if all our panelists could introduce themselves and maybe give an idea of what their careers look like and what we're being introduced to. So Joanne, would you like to start?
Okay, I'll try very quickly. I've been in the theatre business for 45 years. I started in stage management. I've actually got a maths degree and decided there was room in the theatre industry for somebody with a business brain. I started in stage management because I think it's really important that if you are going to be a producer, you need to know how every other job works. I've done most of my career has been freelance. I spent quite a long time working for Michael White, legendary producer. I ran the International Festival of Musical Theatre in Cardiff for its 8 years, and I've also run an international youth orchestra. I joined Trafalgar, where I am now, 4 years ago. I'm their executive general manager, which basically means I look after the big musicals that they do. Currently, I'm working on The King and I, which is about to go back out on tour, hopefully, once theatres open, and also another big musical for next summer. Nothing else to say, really. That's it.
Richard, how about you?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice to see so many smiley faces. My name is Richard Darbourne. I am currently producer for the Ambassador Theatre Group. And the Ambassador Theatre Group, ATG, is a venue owner, really. And this venue is one of them behind. There's 12 in London and another 35 around the UK and now some in the US. I started out, so I did a degree in theology at university, which meant I got to do a lot of theatre. You couldn't study theatre, but you could study theatre. But we did lots of plays, and I was doing everything at that point: writing, directing, acting, singing, even. And but when I left university, I did 3 years in a management trainee job, actually, for Cathay Pacific Airways, and which I enjoyed greatly. But it made me feel like I had this burning desire to set up a theatre company. I say that in inverted commas because I had no idea what that meant, really. But it meant I moved to London in 2006, and 14 years later, so I kind of the first 5 or 6 years very much freelance on the fringe at the Edinburgh Festival, international festivals, and the writing and directing and performing. And I kind of evolved, as I think many would probably testify. I think you do evolve into production, really. Someone has to take the lead on picking up the phone and actually trying to put a spreadsheet together and make it all sort of stack up. And that became more formal in 2012 when I set up my own company, and I picked up some tours, and it started to sort of snowball from there. And then in 2015, I accepted an offer to become producer for ATG, which I thought I would do for a little bit, and here I am 5 years later. So the last time we had a show on was on March the 16th. We had 8 shows on, which I was overseeing, the biggest of which was Pretty Woman, which had just opened. And we had 9 to 5, the musical. And I'm trying to remember what else now. We just opened Amelia Clark and the Seagull as well, amongst other things. And we are hoping to get back up and running early next year, but that's what that describes me.
Wonderful, that sounds great. How about you, Clive?
So hi everybody, lovely to see you all. I trained at RADA in stage management and left in 1978, so 42 years ago. Went to the Repertory Theatre, so I went to Watford Palace, Oldham Coliseum, the Watermill in Newbury, and then into the West End to be a showman initially on My Fair Lady, the 1979 production in the West End. And that got me into commercial theatre in some respects, but from My Fair Lady, I was sent to Germany to do the Rocky Horror Show in the original production for Cameron Mackintosh, the show that is not on his CV, because the 12-week tour was cut short because nobody knew what the Rocky Horror Show was in Germany in 1981. So we came home. It's successfully now run by Howard Panto, and it goes around the world. I then moved into, so I went from the repertory theatres via the West End back to the Royal Court and did 3 years at the Royal Court Theatre in Sloane Square, doing the original production of Edward Bond's Restoration, the Irish version of The Seagull, five productions over 2 years. And then I went off on tour. I got asked to go on tour for producers John Newman and Mark Finesse, who at the time were the biggest touring producers in the country, and did between them about 30 productions a year. They didn't have production managers in those days. So a producer in those days was a producer on the end of a phone in an office, probably somewhere in Soho, that got the rights for plays and then assembled a team, and the team ran the show. There was no in-house production manager. There was no in-house producer. The producer in the stage management team ran the show. So I moved into production really from my 12 years on tour, touring big shows like post-West End runs of shows like Another Country, The Real Thing, Anyone for Dennis, the last ever nude review to tour the land, which was called Why Not Bangkok. And then I did a chorus line on tour and big musicals. I went from there into ballet and worked for the English National Ballet for 2 years, touring arena productions of their in and around Royal Albert Hall productions around the world. I then got poached by the BBC. The BBC were looking in the 90s for a stage manager to run their season of plays for BBC One and Two called Performance. And they pursued me quite heavily for about 18 months, and I eventually gave in. And I ended up working for Simon Curtis, who I'd worked with at the Royal Court in 1981, who was assistant to Max Stafford Clark, and Simon Curtis by then was a producer at BBC Television. So I then spent 6 years doing productions, stage productions of plays. So we did 4 weeks rehearsal in the studio, as you would in a normal rehearsal period. And then we did 12 days in the studio. And my good luck was that I was one of the last people to film a drama in Television Centre 1, TC1, which is now one of the only surviving studios in Shepherd's Bush. From there, I became disillusioned with missing the audience participation and the live aspect of everything. So I moved back into theatre, and I worked for a very long time with one of our other colleagues on here, Joanne Benjamin, at the entertainment business, and for over 20 years, and still we do things together, and we've done very many big productions all over the world. We've ran the Verbier Festival Orchestra. Joe was chief executive of the International Festival of Musical Theatre in Cardiff for 6 years. I was the project director, and we've worked with Michael White on productions in the West End of Boys in the Band. Oh golly, so many. And now I'm a freelance producer, having general managed with Joe Lend Me a Tenner the musical and Loserville the musical in the West End. We toured Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which we co-produced. And now I'm the freelance producer with very many things in development, having also been for 3 years the in-house executive producer at Hackney Empire. So it's long, but I'm quite old.
No, that's fantastic. And it's so interesting how all of you have such different pathways into it. One question that we got asked quite a bit, and I realise it's probably quite a hard question to answer, is what would a day in your life maybe look like as a producer? I'm guessing there might be meetings and all sorts, but what does a producer's day look like? Richard, would you start us off this time?
Yeah, sure. Because I think it potentially is more relevant to the future, I'm going to take the optimistic, positive view that come next year, we will be moving ahead and you will all move ahead in your career. So I'm going to talk about a day in the life before March 16th, because in reality, a day in the life in the last 6 months has been quite different. Largely sitting, I'm not actually in this theatre, as you probably guessed, just in the room that I'm in. However, the one thing that I think you probably already know, and you may be already experiencing from the shows you're involved with and the things you're doing, is that no 2 days are very rarely the same. It changes quickly. Sometimes it changes by the hour. Sometimes it changes by the email. And I think, especially when as things progress, and what's happening now is you end up juggling a lot of multitude of projects. That I do think is a key part of what it is to put shows on or work off stage, if you will. It's a lot of juggling. You can jump from a big musical to a small play to a marketing meeting for something that's happening there's opening soon, to a development meeting for something that might not be happening for the next 2 years. And that can all happen from phone call to phone call and from meeting to meeting. So I think you've got to enjoy that aspect of it, because it is a lot of different sort of hat wearing. And so throughout the day, you could be doing, as I say, you could be involved in marketing. You could be spending time at your desk as you go through rights, getting royalties for things, agreements in place for things. There's a lot of time spent there. You can be, what I really enjoy doing is part of a development process. So you could be in something like a workshop. And then the most exciting thing, which I always try and keep time for, is trying to spend time with the shows themselves. Too often you can spend a lot of your producing life living behind a computer, and it's actually, you have to sometimes drag yourself away from that and go down to the rehearsal room, or to the technical rehearsal, or to the show itself, and try and spend time communicating with the people actually delivering it, because that's all important. So as a result, it can be long days. You can be doing a kind of the full job during the day, and then at the theatre at night. And I've now got 4 young children, so it's I can't believe I just said 4. We had a third child. We went for a third child back in December last year, and we had 2 identical twin girls on the 18th of September. Anyway, they're doing very well. So I also have time. So that's a lot of the day as well. Sorry, I jumped around a bit there, but hopefully you got an idea.
No, that sounds great. Joanne, have you got anything to add to that?
I would say that Richard is right, that there are sort of 3 stages. There's development, there's actually getting a show on, and then there's sort of running a show. For me, I find one of the most interesting times is actually getting the show on, and literally going from doing a budget to a meeting with the director, to a meeting with the designers, to a meeting with the production manager, to making sure the contracts are done, to going to a marketing meeting. Have we got all the photos we need? Have we, it's all of those bits and pieces. I would say once we get into tech, if you've got the right team there doing their work, what the producer does is the shoulder to cry on and provides coffee and chocolate. That's it. That's the producer's job. Be there to be the shoulder to cry on and provide lots of coffee and chocolate. But it is, like Richard, I really enjoy being with the company and making sure they're all right. And I think a very important part of being a producer, and I think the 3 people you have on this panel are probably supreme examples of this, are producers who actually get to know their company and they know how the show works. They can provide that ear, and they always have an open door policy. It's really important that company know they can come and ask you a question, because then if there's a problem, it gets resolved when it's a molehill. It doesn't grow into the mountain. And it can be anything from the bulb on the dressing table in my dressing room doesn't work, to something mountainous like my costume's horrible and I don't like it. But if you have forged those relationships early on, they'll come and talk to you, and you can probably calm them down and resolve it, rather than it becoming a huge explosion in the middle of the tech. And you do spend your life, I think a producer's job is getting people to do what you need them to do, but making them think it's their idea in the first place. That is the job.
What a good way of putting it. Clive, have you got anything to add to this?
Well, they've covered very eloquently all, and Joe's last phrase is a phrase I believe Mr. Michael White taught us.
Yes, he did.
A lot of the job is once you've done all the planning and the show's up and running, is pastoral care of the team you have employed to run your show. So it's in your best interest to have a working relationship with them. You won't always enjoy working with some of the people that are working on your shows. That's the way life goes. But you have to work out a working relationship with some of them, because, as you know, many shows these days, the long-running ones, run for very, very many long years and go off all over the world. So I enjoy the process of the show up and running as well, but it's the hard work of multitasking when you're in your office to get the show on. And quite often you have a team of people in your office to help you, but it's the ultimate decision rests on your shoulders. So it can be the phone may never stop ringing during the night, and it will ring very, very early in the morning, and you're off. And then, as Richard said, you can be in the office all day or wherever you are doing work, and then you go in to see the show and make sure the show is, the show, as you all know, as stage managers, has to be the same every night as advertised. And it's ultimately the producer's job. Michael White always said that the hardest thing a producer ever has to do is put the notice up to close the show. And that's a piece of advice you should all remember.
Sounds great. One thing that's really interesting to come from that then is, what are it's probably quite a hard question to answer, what's your favourite thing about being a producer, each of you? Is there one thing you're like, this is why I do it? Or is there lots of little reasons? Clive, I know you just ended, but do you want to start us?
My favourite thing about being a producer, and I think the other two panellists would say the same, is a full house on their feet, clapping and applauding a first night. You have done your job. Simply as that, really.
I totally agree. It's standing at the back of the auditorium, watching an audience enjoy something you've put on. That is why we do it.
I would agree. I remember it really distinctly. There was a most exhilarating moment when for the first time, it was around about 2012, and I was in the foyer of a show, and for the first time I looked at all these audience, and it was at the Arts Theatre, 350 seats, and it was full. But I didn't know anybody in the audience. And for the past 5 years, if I'm honest, everyone in the audience were sort of friends and family usually. I'd kind of sort of dragged along to a scratch night and all the rest of it. And to see a full crowd, which means, all the aspects, whether that your marketing, everything you were trying to do came together. It's truly exhilarating. I think we'd all agree it's a lifestyle as much as it's a job. It is quite, it's a big part of you, but it is there are truly great moments, and I would agree that makes it all worthwhile. And I would add to that as well. There is a lot of pride to be taken in getting things from A to B, and A to B into C, and I think it's seeing that process work well. Whatever the show, really, it doesn't mean that it could be big show, small show, any show, but just seeing it done, feeling like it's done well, and the people are communicating well together. There's a good atmosphere. Energy is really important in our industry. Positive energy. It can get you so far as a team. And I think if you see that, you can feel it happening. And I think when that does happen, that's the time when you take great satisfaction as well.
I think it's also it's standing at the back of the auditorium and knowing there's nothing else you personally could have done to make this show any better. And it's like, it's like, I have not ever had children, but I suspect it's like having a baby. You give birth to this project and you're letting it out into the world, and all these people are going to criticize it. It's the most awful feeling on press night. No, what are the reviewers going to say? That is the most difficult thing of all.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you all for sharing. If any of the attendees have any questions they have so far, you can put them into the chat and we will try and include them at some point. So kind of the next set of questions we had are very much focusing on the industry and producing in general. And one thing that got brought up a bit was that when you're producing, you're often looking after large teams with lots of people involved. And some people were wondering, what's your advice for managing all these people and all these different departments? Joanne, would you like to start us?
I think the most important thing I would say, and I suspect the other two will agree, is that you pick the heads of your teams very well. The important thing is to get a good person at the head of each team, a good production manager, a good company manager, good wardrobe mistress, good lighting technician, whatever. And a production manager, I think all three of us have probably used, a certain Mr. Richard Bullimore. His criterion when we are interviewing staff is not what their experience is or what their CV says. It's basically, on a really bad production week, would I go to the pub with this person? In other words, are they going to be a good team member and actually fit in? And that's the really important thing, is you get a team of people who all work together. Sometimes, unfortunately, directors do not promote a good working relationship among their creative team, and then as producer you are in the middle trying to sort that out. I have been lucky enough to work with at least two directors who are absolutely amazing team leaders, and you usually find that the show itself is much better when there is somebody at the head of the team leading it really well. And as a producer you have to be a leader, but you also have to let people get on with their jobs. There are some people who micromanage, and I don't think that promotes a good team working relationship. I think people need to be left to get on with their jobs, but know that they can come to you as the producer if there's a problem or if they need to ask something, and that you are there and you know what's going on, but you're not trying to micromanage them, because then you have a much better chance of everybody working well together. That
sounds great. Clive, have you got anything to add?
Well, I agree with Richard and Joe that, you know, each production is different, and each production will work in a different way. But as a producer, you are the person who is responsible. As an independent producer, you are the person that's probably raised the money to get the show on. So you've got, you're looking after your investors, the show, and its long life, and being able to manage that. And if you put the right team in place, it makes your job so much easier. And I reiterate, Richard Bullimore is one of our greatest production managers, and we have all three, I think, work with him. You will be giving a note. The director will be giving a note session at the end of the technical, and the cast will have had their notes and been dismissed, and then it goes down to the production team, and the production team get their notes, and Mr. Bullimore will be fidgeting in his seat going, pub, because he wants to go and discuss everything in a working environment. And for some people, that the working environment of a technical team is the best place to get something done with a large drink in your hand. And that's something that you still take on board. You don't drink while you're working, but you might enjoy a drink while you're getting notes afterwards. And you might find that your team work much better for it.
Wonderful. I love hearing how much you've all enjoyed working with this person. Richard, have you got anything to add on to this?
Yeah, well, only that I think Joanne's absolutely right. It's getting that team. It's massive. It's getting that team together and then allowing them to get on with, or trusting them to get on with it. But I also think that is quite it's a skill. It's a skill to learn, because actually I found, as I'm sure many of you are finding, or that when you're doing stuff, if you're doing stuff on at university, or that you're doing everything, and you're driving the van, you're driving the car, you're asking so and so to make this for you for free, and then so you may be listening to this thinking, well, I am the production manager, I'm the lighting designer, and there's that, and actually, one thing that obviously it's hard, but you may be finding that actually at least you know where everything is at every one time. And I do think problem we have as producers is we do quite like to be in control and know what's going on. And actually, when things do get bigger, the reality is that you do have to you have to cede that control. And I think it's not all, it takes a while. Same with directors, everyone actually in the top of those teams. have to kind of find the right people and go, okay, that's going down there, that's going down there, that's going down there. And I think it's, when you go back to like managing those teams, I think it's, you want to be absolutely aware of everything, because as Clive says, it is your ultimate responsibility, but at the same time, you don't want to micromanage, and I think it's important not to do that. So you allow the people around you to do their jobs as well. It's not always easy, but that's the thing to head for, I think.
Most producers are control freaks, and we find it very difficult to let go and let other people take responsibility. I don't know about Richard and Clive, but I'm saying from my point of view, it's because we have this view in our head that we can do it better than anybody else, but you have to let it go.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Even down to if you're the current trend for live streaming things, you might be asked to go to an edit, and you watch an edit, and it's a television thing. It's probably, some of you will go on to work in television and film. Joe and I produced at the International Festival of Cardiff, the European premiere of Ragtime, which was recorded for BBC 4 and put on air. And because I'd been at the BBC, they all knew me in Cardiff at BBC Cardiff, and I was invited to go to the credits session and see what order the credits would go up in. And of course, contractually, there's a set order. When it got to the Cardiff Festival staff, I said, everybody else seems to be in 10 point. We need to be contractually in 20 points. And if you watch the broadcast, and it's broadcast occasionally on these late night programs now, the original Cardiff production of Ragtime, it goes 10 point, 10 point, 10 point, Joanne Benjamin 20 point, Clive Chenery 20 point, and then it goes back to 10 point. That's because I happened to be in the room and I claimed the production for ourselves. We do give up control.
That sounds brilliant. One thing coming off from that is that, of course, we have a lot of stage management students here, and a lot of people are wondering what sort of level of contact and what sort of contact would, what contact would you normally be having with the stage managers, if any? Would you guys be talking to the stage managers much, or would that be another person to do that?
Every day and all day. I think, I mean, Richard has a bigger job than I do. He's looking after a lot more shows, but certainly when we're in rehearsal, I would go to the rehearsal room every day, make sure stage management were right, chat to them, take them out for a drink, because apart from anything else, you get to hear what's really going on in the rehearsal room if you talk to the stage management. But it's important I think it's very difficult, but everybody has their own job in a show, and it's really important that everybody feels equally respected. And stage management have the most difficult job during rehearsals, and it's important that they feel that they do have that contact with the producer or general manager, so that again, if they think there's something going wrong, they can tell you. Not all producers are like this. There are some producers who very much sit in their office and don't make the contact. So I would temper what the three of us are saying by saying that not every producer is the same, but this is how I think it should be. That's all.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, actually, one thing I've utilised quite a lot is also is WhatsApp, and certainly with the company manager, and to have a very kind of, and for them to feel, to try and set up at the beginning of a production that there's a sense of, there is a smooth sense of dialogue, that they can feel, because actually, you know, again, just on when we had to close down the shows, you know, on that night we had 4 shows in London, so we had physically you couldn't go, could only go to one, so we had to kind of send the team. And I do think, because I also think it's important that those working on the show feel confident to be able to go to their stage manager, rather than, I don't think it helps to sometimes if they circumnavigate that person and try and think, oh, I'll go and speak straight to the producer or the production manager, or, you know, and I do think it goes back to kind of getting that right team together, because you want the stage, it's really important that the stage manager, the company manager, those on the ground leading the show from a day-to-day point of view, feel empowered and feel they've got the right level of support, but also feel they're able to go and crack on and do their jobs as well. Because sometimes producers can be a bit kind of, oh, well, please contact me, and it's like, well, unless it's Christmas Eve, you know, and they're on a tour, and actually then, you know, and I think there's sometimes, but as Joe says, the relationship with those stage management teams, absolutely vital. Yeah,
I do concur with Richard about the respect level. Whilst obviously producers, we do get to know the teams, I would expect them to go to their immediate senior if there's a problem and not jump over them to come to a producer. But you know, one is always there if there is a problem they don't want to discuss with somebody else.
I would say the same. You know, so the hierarchy that you all know of the ASM will go to the stage manager will go to the company manager, or indeed the ASM will go and talk to the company manager, who ultimately is the person who's running the show, either in the West End or on tour, in conjunction with the general manager and the producers, and then report upwards. But yes, if there is a real problem, ask to see the producer. But respect obviously your station within the show and report upwards. But as a producer, it's important for us to get to know you. And you know, it was once, the analogy was once made by a producer I worked with, who said that the stage management of the engine house of any production, and golly, is that true?
And I think you guys should keep that in mind as well as you go through your you know, your careers. That hierarchy is the right one. You know, you don't. I think when you know, you'll meet company managers, production managers, and producers, and I think you should, you know, you should think about. Certainly, you think for you. From your own position, you do want to get to a position where you've got a really healthy relationship with that channel. So when you are meeting people for jobs, don't forget you're interviewing them as well at the same time that they're interviewing you. And I think you want to humbly just, you know, work towards that environment, because we all agree that environment being healthy and being positive will solve 70% of the problem, no matter how big it is, really. I think if that channel is a good one.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that relationship dynamic. That's really useful. Coming off what Clive said about having to decide to cancel that show, what kind of decisions have you guys had to make, either good or bad, that as a producer, what really key ones can you think of? Clive, do you want to begin? I know you've just said one story.
I mentioned, so Joe and I were producing a very successful tour of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy live radio show with the original BBC radio cast. And at the same time, we were working with a co-producer to produce a tour of Ready, Steady, Cook Live. And Joe had spent a very, very much long time negotiating with the theatres to produce a one-night tour of it. I, at the same time, was negotiating with 1,000 Michelin-starred chefs to appear to cook. We had 3 chefs a night, 4 contestants, 365 venues, and the tour was booked, and we were in production for the tour of Hitchhikers. And I was looking at the figures, as you do. You monitor the figures as a producer every day, and it's a commercial proposition. And we learnt quite quickly for us, but quite late on for the theatres, that nobody wanted to buy tickets to see cooking on stage. So we then spent 3.5 weeks cancelling venues and chefs, and that's an experience you have to do as a producer. You have to pick the phone up and call the theatre manager, the theatre chain. Richard's chain had booked a lot of them. ATG. We spent a lot of time with Michael Linus's staff in his office in those days, working out how we could extricate, you know, our contractual duty to appear, the show to appear, and everybody was, because of our experience, everybody was very good, and we did it with the least possible collateral damage to anybody. But it was Joe and I that made all those phone calls. And talking to chefs' agents is worse than talking to theatrical agents, believe you me.
I'll take your word for it. Richard, what about you? Have you got any experiences to share?
That certainly is the hardest crux. I think it's it's really hard, but it's about making a firm decision and a quick decision, because you know, what we were talking about before about celebrating that moment when it all goes right and all goes smoothly. There's some decisions you make before you go on sale, but the moment you go on sale with a show of any size, you learn what the appetite is for it. And I'm pleased to say, and I'm sure actually the guys will agree, is that, you know, I think of the 25 shows I've done now, I mean, we're only talking about 2 or 3, but that have really gone, oh, this is not going to work. And you know, now, well, I'll say we a couple of years ago, really, we'd had a really good success in the West End with a David Mamet play called Glengarry Glen Ross. It's a fantastic play, and we decided to take it on tour. And what had done very well in the West End, it basically became very clear very quickly that Glengarry Glen Ross sounded like a whiskey tasting evening, or it was sort of, no one had any idea what it was, and certainly no one wanted to come to see it. And it was really hard, that, because we had to very quickly work out. It was about 6 weeks, 5-6 weeks before we opened, and that's the difference, because as a production team, you do weigh up the responsibilities you have to stage management, to cast crew, to everybody, about whether or not to go ahead. And in that regard, we worked out that really the cost of cancelling, it was going to be tough. So we actually went ahead, but we had to go to all our investors, to all the venues, and really just be honest about it and say, look, this is not going to work, where this is going to be very hard. And we went through, and we actually went through that. We went through it without managing to cut any of the wages of the people working on the show. So all the crew, all the cast, and you know, we managed to sort of stick to that. And I'm pleased we did. But it's a hard situation, because there are just times where you know immediately it's going to be a slog. And I do think again, it's easier to enjoy things when it's all going very, very well. But I think it can be the mark of how you grow in this industry, is how you cope and how you handle yourself and communicate when things are not going very well. Because getting through that is a big thing. But for me, those have been the hardest times. And Joe mentioned press night before, and we'd worked really hard on a brand new musical, and God, we loved it. We absolutely loved it, and it was such a warm and uplifting thing. And basically, we opened it on press night in a tryout venue, which is a venue where it was a 300-seat space where you sort of see what happens, and you hope to move it to a bigger space and take it from there. And we had our press night, and we thought it was all warm and fuzzy, but as a result, the critics just sort of, well, they just said it was warm and fuzzy and a bit rubbish. So unfortunately, we got it just didn't land at all, and we had to make a really, really hard decision then to not, because it was emotionally, we were all so attached to it, and you will be as well, to everything that you do. I mean, that's the reality of why we're here. I'm sure there's projects you'll be working on that you're absolutely in love with, and at that point, it's very hard to make a business decision rather than an emotional one. And that's the point where sometimes you've got to extract yourself and just look at the best way forward. And with that example, we didn't take it forward, and and as a result, we lost a lot of the development money, and it was hard. But so yeah, those are the hard moments, I think.
Yeah. I think, following on from what Richard said, yes, I think to me, closing a show is the most difficult thing. But I think on a personal level, you do get very involved with what you do. And it's very hard, and you have to learn to look after yourself emotionally and mentally. The two hardest things I've had to do, apart from closing shows, is actually walk away from 2 jobs in my career. Because I was just not in the right place at the right time. And one particular job, I was very close to having a nervous breakdown, because I just couldn't. I'm somebody who's tenacious, and I won't give up on something. and I was determined not to give up on this particular job. And eventually it was like, I have to leave, and I left. And it was the best thing I could possibly done, because then I got another job about 3 weeks later, which was much better. But you have to look after yourself. And if you stay somewhere where you absolutely know you're not right, it's very bad for you. And actually, if you find you're in that position and you talk to whoever your next, you know, if you're an ASM talking to the stage manager or talking to the company manager or even talking to the producer, they're usually extremely understanding if there just happens to be a mismatch in that particular place. But you do feel that you're giving up on something, and that's the most difficult feeling when you're, as Richard said, if you give up on a development project or you give up on a show that you've had a real emotional attachment to. It's like a breakup of a love affair. It's terrible, but you learn to live with it. But you can't do your job well unless you are passionately involved with what you're doing. That, unfortunately, is I think anyway, I think you need to be passionately involved with what you're doing, but then it hurts more when it goes wrong. But that's the way we are.
I entirely agree with that as well. But also, we should say to everybody that throughout your career, your own pastoral care has to be looked after. Your welfare is just as important as anybody else on the team, and you might need to step away sometimes. You might need to go and have a walk. Famously on King the musical at the Piccadilly Theatre, it was a very, very fraught 3-month rehearsal period, an extremely fraught 5-week technical rehearsal. I in those days was production stage manager with a big team. One afternoon, the third director that week had taken over the show to try and save it, said something on a microphone publicly in the auditorium, and the entire team walked out, and we went for a walk around the block. We all heaved a sigh of relief at each other that we'd all left at the same time, came back, and I walked on stage and said, could we continue where we left off, please? And we carried on. But it was 5 minutes that everybody in that building needed to keep us all going. You know, you might need to go to see a masseur occasionally and have a relax. You might need to go for a long walk, you know, take your dog for a walk, go home, phone your mum, whatever, but do it. It's very, very important throughout your career that you look after yourself as well. Because as a stage manager, you're going to look after so many different people's welfare throughout your career, right the way up to producer.
That's the important thing, is as you move up through your career, you'll be looking after other people. And it's also, sometimes it's difficult, and I can't tell you how to do it. It's an age and an experience thing. Is you sometimes sense that somebody's not quite all right, even if they haven't said anything to you, and you need to judge when is the moment to talk to them, or whether to leave them, or you know, it's sometimes very difficult to judge the right time to help somebody. But it's important to be aware that aware of your feelings and other people's feelings.
The company manager's door will always be open, as you know, at the stage management level. The company manager will then report to the producer, and that can set another level of care for you. But always, you know, as we've always said, report up to the correct channels. But certainly, when I was a company manager, the door was always open. People could always knock on the door and come in and speak, and I always took the time to do that, as you do as a producer. But you do it with heads of department initially, and then individuals when required.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that, guys. That was, and you've completely answered the next question we had, which was, whoops, oh dear, all about like mental health and looking after it in the industry, as I know that was something people were really keen on talking about. One thing that comes up at quite a lot of our panels is that students early on are very nervous about making mistakes and doing things incorrectly. And so we were kind of hoping that you guys would be willing to share a time you've made a mistake, maybe had a bit of a muck up, and how you fixed it, and did it really matter that much? We'd love to hear.
Mine's also a stage management mistake. I was DSM on a production of Three Sisters. It was directed by Jonathan Miller. It had Janet Sussman, Nigel Davenport, John Shrapnel. We were playing leads. It was our last date before coming into the West End, and I had flu and I was tired, and I was running the corner, and there were 4 acts in the show, And the last act, instead of pressing a cue 10 minutes before the end of the show, I pressed the button to bring the tabs in. So the tabs came in and the audience went home, and I thought, this is it, I'm going to be sacked, because I'd never been in the West End. It was my first show. It was due to go into the West End. So I rushed round to Janet Sudman's dressing room and going, I'm really, really sorry, terribly sorry. She said, darling, she said, don't worry. She said, the audience here won't understand the play and we'll get to the pub 10 minutes early. And it was just so nice to have somebody actually just dismiss it. The point is, you will all make mistakes. We all still make mistakes. And actually, if you, whatever age you are, if you get to an age you think you know it all, you should give the business up, because we all learn from every single show we do, and we make mistakes every day. And the only important thing to know is just to own up and say, look, I've made a mistake, and that's it. Get on with it. Richard probably will think differently, but that's...
No, but I think it draws upon one of the questions is that I see in the chat is about who do you talk to if you need support. And I just think that's it. Is that one of the a mistake that can be made is maybe not speaking out early enough, or not feeling like you can ask for help, or maybe thinking that there's something you're not sure of, or there's something you're worried about, but not telling anybody about it. I think like certainly I remember early on, like, I'm sure you'll all be the same, is that when you're trying to start out, you sort of say you want to say yes to everything, and you know, in those moments where you can feel like, if I've ever felt stressed, it's because of those times where you know you've stretched yourself far too thin, and you're just aware of these things moving, and you go, and I think it's about whatever level you're at, you should always, the people you meet along the way, your contemporaries or your friends, that you may be not on the same job together, you may be doing completely different things, but sometimes it's great to have those people around who you can just text, or you can phone, or you can call, and you say, I've got this, or I've got this, I've got this. And you know, I do find one of the things about our industry is that people sort of say, well, it must be very competitive. I was like, well, it's more collaborative, really. I mean, obviously everyone's doing different things, but it's more collaborative than competitive, really. Everyone wants everyone else really to win. Everyone wants every other show to be a success, really. And actually, when you do ask for help or advice, or you write to someone, you know, you should always keep doing that, because they will, well, hopefully they do return it and things. I still speak to the first producer. When I was at university, I met a producer who is now 88 years young, and she's just been recognised with a special recognition Olivier Award, a lady called Thelma Holt, who has been producing many times, and I still call Thelma and chat things through, and she'll swear a lot and tell me this, that, and the other, and she says, it's all bollocks, darling, you know, and then it is important to have those people in your life who you can be yourself to and speak to and things.
I think that's absolutely true. And I certainly, first of all, I phone other general managers or producers to ask questions, and most of the time they will happily give advice, as I do to other people who phone me. But you'll get to a point you go, I'm trying to do this deal and I don't know what to do, and you phone somebody up and say, what would you do in this position? And they're usually very good. Because I think somebody once said this to me, and it's a great thing to remember, because like Richard, when you start off, you're very tempted to say yes to everything, and then you get in a panic because you think, I don't know how to do this, I don't know what the answer to this is. And the definition of growing up in theatre is when somebody asks you a question, instead of saying yes, you say, I don't know the answer to that, but I know somebody who does, and I'll get back to you. And there's always somebody out there who you can phone and say, what would you do about this? And as Richard says, it may look as if we're competitive, but actually most people are very collaborative and prepared to answer your questions, spend 10 minutes with you talking about something. I think we're all the same. We want people of your generation to learn the right way and to learn the right answers to things, and we happily give our time to make sure that you do learn how it all works properly.
I entirely agree with both of you, and you know, we're not competitive, we're collaborative, really. I only this morning had 2 phone calls from respected colleagues asking me what I would do in a certain situation, and I gave them my advice. They both rang off. One of them rang back an hour later and said, I've spoken to somebody else, you're entirely right, this is what I'm going to do. So, you know, it's good. It's you're not, there's no point in being obstructive to somebody. You know, it's a big world out there. There's a lot of productions that need being done, and that requires a lot of producers and a lot of good stage managers working their way up to become producers. You will all develop different careers in your time. Some of you will stay stage managers because you want to. I was a DSM on tour for very many years because I enjoyed being a DSM in the corner. Then I moved into company management, then to general management and producing. But my path from my little CV is, you know, I've been, you can't say I've done one thing for my career. I've worked in opera, ballet, TV, musical theatre, development of musicals, corporate events. I was the person that cued the first London Eye opening ceremony in 1999, which was a whole different Zoom conversation about that, queuing Concorde and fireworks at the same time, but things like that. So, you know, you have to collaborate with people. And I still, throughout lockdown has been terrible for all of us. I had a lot of texts from people I haven't spoken to for years saying, "You all right?" And that's all they put. And I sent back, "Yeah, I'm fine, thank you." And we've connected again. Di Fraser's watching now. I haven't seen Di for over a year and a half, but we know we always pick up where we left off. Di is a respected company and stage manager of many years standing, and runs the, you know, is involved with the SMA for as long as I have been, I think, really. And it's always a joy to see you.
Thank you. It's always a joy just to be involved. That's why I do these things, the SMA sessions, the Zoom sessions, and the Society of Theatre Research and things, because it's just wonderful to stay involved.
Yeah.
And you never lose that. If you lose that, give it up.
Yeah.
If you lose the thrill of walking through the stage door, then stop.
Yeah. And you must always pass on knowledge. You know, part of being good in this industry is passing on knowledge. Don't bottle it up inside you. Somebody else might gain enormously from your knowledge that you'll learn on the way. And another thing that Mr. White told us is be nice to people on the way up, because you'll meet them on the way down.
I think one of the really important things that you've all brought up is the importance of being able to apologize. I'm wrong, sorry. Yeah. It takes the wind out of everybody's sails. If someone's going to get people are nervous. Their careers, their personae are on the line. They're out there often in front of the audience, and you're not. The big thing, I've made awful mistakes as a DSM, including bringing the tabs in on the end of a scene in entirely the wrong place. And the first thing you do is you get out there and say, "I'm really sorry."
Yeah.
And that
I used to hate being a DSM at the Ashcroft in Croydon, where the tabs were electric and the red button for the go was next to the red button for the elects. Yes, we have all bought the tabs in at the wrong time at the Ashcroft Croydon.
Okay.
The secret you may have learned already, and if you haven't, then you will, is it, like, you know, there isn't, it is an industry where there isn't really necessarily a blueprint. There are things, there are great places to train, and there are great places to learn and people to learn with. And you may have come across things like there's a book called "So You Want to Be a Producer," which I think is a good thing to read. This job, this industry, you really do learn by doing. And that can be, you know, a bit hair raising and a bit rocky at times, but that's why I think so. So when you're going about what you're doing now, and you may think, well, gosh, and what we're doing in terms of bigger shows, etc. You may think that, I think you should feel like the differences aren't as massive as you would think. Really, it's this. You know, if you're working on on the shows you're working on and the shows you put together and enjoyed working on, and you've gone about that kind of by being positive and being honest and just going about that with an energy and detail and learning, those are really the cornerstones of what you do going forward. They may be a bit bigger, but it's it's the same principles at the heart. Some of the stuff when I was at the 70-seat Jermyn Street Theatre, where I was for 3 years, is very same now, whether it's at the Piccadilly or wherever.
Yeah, I agree. I produced at the Jermyn Street as well. My name was above the door for a South African season with Anthony Biggs. Who did the scene changes? Me.
Correct.
We did 5 shows a day. They were all one-act plays. And Penny Horner, who was the general manager there, said to me, "So who's doing the scene changes? Because we haven't got anything in the budget." And she said, "Well, it's you and me, isn't it?" And it certainly was, you know. So nothing changes in that respect. You will always stay a stage manager, whatever you become.
Yeah.
And that is, in my opinion, very good.
So the sort of questions we'll be moving on to now are kind of like getting into the career and people, making their way through the careers of stage management, producing, everything wonderful like that. The first question is quite easy. What are your tips for people who are trying to start out in producing and break into the industry? We also had quite a nice question come in about, do you have to be in London or could you do it outside of London as well? It'd be really nice to hear your opinions on that. Joanne, would you like to start us off?
It's very difficult because I think everybody should start in stage management. I think you learn in stage management everything you need to know about putting a show on. You learn how to deal with people, you learn how the show works, and it's a good place to start, from whence you can either go to company manager, general manager, producer, or you can go into television, or you can, there are various routes open to you, but you can start that way. And absolutely, you can start out of town. A very long time ago, before any of you were born, when I started, you had to spend 40 weeks out of town before you got your equity card. And it's actually really useful to do shows out of town because the West End can be quite a rarefied atmosphere, and learning what happens on the road or in a subsidised theatre is very, very useful to your career. Absolutely, if you want to start somewhere other than London, it's just as good. There's no requirement to start in London. It's probably easier to get a job out of town to start with. I know it was the sheet of questions. I have no idea what it's going to be like in the new normal. I think I do unfortunately think it's going to be more difficult to get jobs, but I think that we'll just have to keep trying and making sure that the newer people coming into the business get the chances they need to get on the ladder. But I mean, there are a lot of people who've done arts administration courses and things like that at university. I still think that learning on the job is the best thing you can possibly do.
How about you, Richard? Have you got any advice for people breaking into industry?
I would agree with Joanne. There aren't many positives at all to say about COVID, but one of them is that remote working will become more possible. I mean, I think it used to be the case that you had to be certainly able to get into London somewhat quickly, and I do think Zoom and other opportunities will mean that people can be further afield, and I think and I also agree that. The out of town is, I mean, I grew up just outside of Blackpool, and I didn't move to London until I was, I can't remember, 24, 25. So I do think like you should certainly, if you don't know your local theatre, then you should get to know it, what it does, who the people are, small and big, as places to go and people to write to and say this is what you're interested in. I would also agree that I do think that there are many routes in, but stage management is certainly, just understanding the technical side of it is just so useful. And I would say that is that more useful than trying to get an apprenticeship or an assistant job in a big production company? Yeah, probably is actually, because you can get quite sort of swamped up in that. I went through the kind of freelance world, and as a result, I certainly feel like if you are kind of graduating and trying to work it out and thinking about Edinburgh Festival and things like that. I mean, I just had to try and work out how to get an income going that wasn't, I mean, I would say I've been producing theatre for 14 years. I've been making a living out of it for 9. And so it did take that first 5 years was, and we were all the same. I certainly, we were all kind of having to stop where even when we were rehearsing our own shows, we had to stop at 4 o'clock every day because we had to go and sort of do tutoring and things like that. And everyone had to go and do their second job basically. And whether that was tutoring or in a bar or whatever it was to kind of do that. So I wouldn't feel, and if that's the case for you, I certainly wouldn't feel like you're on your own like that. And there's a well-respected director who's come through called Blanche McIntyre, and it was an interview she did when she had her first job at the National, and she said, "What does success to you look like?" And she said, "Not having to take a second job." And I think that's I think that's quite right. So you know, I do think you do have to think about what and also respected act. And lots of people have to kind of do other things to kind of make ends meet, certainly in the beginning. And do think about that. How are you going to support yourself and take the steps? And also, I would say a key thing I kept doing was trying to set a sort of a 6-month target, because you sort of thinking like, how do I even get anywhere, you know? And actually go, well, what do you want? What can you achieve? And so I think when we started, there was a theatre called the Theatre, still there, Theatre 503, which again was available for hire on a Sunday night, and me and another guy, a writer, said, right, in 6 months' time, let's get a night on in that theatre. Let's try and aim to do that, and we aim to do that. Another every 6 months was make sure you're writing to people that you respect, that you want to kind of learn from. I was writing to every 6 months. I would make sure I would write to directors saying, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. You know, if you've got anything you want to be talk about or something, I'd be really open to it. And it took a while, but it was important to kind of put markers in for yourself to try and to give yourself momentum to keep progressing. So that would be a tip as well.
That sounds like wonderful advice. Clive, have you got anything to add?
Well, I agree with Richard and Joe. You know, it's your career path is in your hands really as a stage manager. You can go in, as I've said before, so many different directions, and you should. I didn't set out to become a producer. I've ended up as a producer, as it were, by default of turning left and right in my career. I've made some left turns that I shouldn't have. I've made some right turns I shouldn't have. But you learn quickly and you step back into the right path. And you should, if you wish to specialize, of course you must, yeah. So I would urge anybody just starting out as a graduate or starting out in the business, train on the job and take the choice to learn. So if you're doing a fit up and somebody wants a hand and you've got the time, give them a hand. You might learn how to wire a plug and amaze yourself. You know, I did. I'm not an electrician to this day, but I understand how a lighting board works. I worked the lighting board on My Fair Lady for 6 months in the West End and ended up being an ASM for Cameron Mackintosh because he was in the wings every night. He said, "What do you do?" And he said, "Well, I've got a job coming up. Do you want to go to Germany?" And I was in the right place at the right time. A lot of this business in stage management and acting is being in the right place at the right time and having the right connections. Talk to people. That's, you know, the more people you know in this business, it's better. We are a huge, huge industry, but we all get to know each other. I get asked all the time, I'm sure Richard and Joe do as well. I've got a show opening tomorrow. The stage manager's become ill and had to drop out. Who do you know? I got asked yesterday if I knew any pantomime dames that could step into a circus next week and open a show of Cinderella Goes to the Circus in Lincoln because one of them's ill. And I rang 5 people I know who play dame for kudos, and they've now cast the show. I had nothing to do with it, but I was helping out. And those little debts get repaid, maybe years down the line. You know, I once was in a lift going up to Paul Elliott's office. It used to be at what is now the Novello Theatre. The top floor was Duncan Weldon. The second floor was Paul Elliott. And I think that I've forgotten who was down on the third below. There's 3 producers. The lift was barely big enough for one person. I was in the lift one day with Duncan Weldon, who was as big as me, Duncan Weldon, myself, and Michael Codron. And Michael Codron said, "You're doing rather well, aren't you? You fit in this lift." And I hadn't worked for him for 12 years. But you know, it's all nice when people say thank you. So it's, you know, yeah, the COVID situation is horrific. One doesn't know what's going to happen, but we have to plan. As I said, I was in a production meeting before this for a show that's going into the Palace for 2 days in December, hopefully. We're planning ahead as if it were happening. Our call this afternoon was with theatre owners NIMAX, and we spoke to them about it. We've put it all in place. All we can do now is be in the lap of the gods of the government to say whether we will be allowed out. And I've got other shows in development for 2021. Hopefully we'll be allowed to do them. But you know, the shows will work. And as to working in London, I think in this day and age, you can work from anywhere. You're online, no one knows where you are. You can, you know, but as Richard said, if you wish to be a producer, because of the industry largely being based within London, suppliers, etc., it's helpful if you can get into London quickly, but you can do that from various parts of the, you know, we've all whizzed up and down the countries as part of our jobs. But you don't have to be in London. London is not the be all and end all. I worked for 12.5 years as a stage manager up to company manager and moved into producing in the provinces. One shouldn't call it the provinces, but I'm old enough to do that. They are hugely important. The work that goes on out of London is probably more important development-wise than it is in London. A lot the three of us are old enough to know when shows used to open, big musicals would open for 6 weeks at the Manchester Opera House and then come into London. And I did the last one of those that did that, which was Winnie the Musical in 1981. 6 months rehearsal, 6 weeks in Manchester, transferred to the Victoria Palace and died a death in 3.5 weeks. But you know, that's not to say that it wasn't a good job. I've got some very many good friends from that show, and we still all talk to each other. So you know,
wonderful. I think it will give people a lot of comfort to hear that you don't have to be immediately within London. Something very interesting you brought up was about being in the right place and the right time. And we only really need one of you to answer this, but someone brought up, who does the producer employ? Do you guys pick and choose everyone who's involved, or is it just the head of departments and then they choose their lower down teams? But this is one question that came up. If any of you would like to answer that, that would be great.
Richard's probably best because he works for a large company and they probably have a better structure of that.
Well, yeah. I mean, and I'm not. So certainly now, yeah. I mean, it's certainly it's very much in the domain of the production manager. Well, so yeah, on each show we have a general manager who builds the. I'll try and be, but when a show's green lit, effectively, then you oversee it, but the general manager will get cracking on with this production manager, who gets given the physical budget, and between them they will go out and staff it really with the production manager. So what I'm getting at is, if I'm honest, then we delivered 18 shows last year, and certainly in terms of stage management and people, it wasn't in my world. So it is the production manager predominantly, along with the general manager who will appoint. But I would say that that's certainly that's only been the case as we've moved into this realm. I mean, you know, Martin Hutchinson somewhere on this call, and I think he was one of the last company managers or stage managers that I appointed, and possibly 2014 maybe. So kind of when I was freelance, which I was for 10 years, then it was, yes, very much so. We were doing tours of 2-handers, 4-handers, things like that. So actually you are really very, very hands-on with those appointments, because effectively you're trying to get people to replicate yourself as best you can, and that's what so a very close relationship in that world. However, I'm not party to that now.
Thank you for explaining that. I think that will help people understand that a bit more. From that, people were kind of wondering, either from personal experiences or when you've had to pick and choose people, do you have any tips for CVs, interviews, any sort of the more formal sets of applications? Joanne, would you like to begin?
In terms of your CV and the letter that goes with it, I think shorter rather than longer. Just be concise about it. The letter really, it's sort of, I would like to do this job because of X, and a lot of people write sort of, you know, I'm a wonderful person and I can do this, that, and the other, and that's fine. I think in interview, it's being yourself and being articulate enough to say what your skills are and what you do. It's probably, it's very much, as I said very earlier on in this call, it's about feeling whether you get on with the team, and I'm afraid sometimes that's how the interviews go. And the point is, you should never ever get discouraged if you don't get a job, because it's not necessarily to do with your talents or anything or the interview. There's quite often they're seeing 4 or 5 people for every job, and it just, the team will work out in a particular way. I'm afraid sometimes you have to go for a lot of interviews before you get a job. But once you've got the first couple of jobs and you've got that on your CV, it makes it a lot easier. And also, once you've worked with people, they'll recommend you to other people. But I certainly with CVs, when I get sort of 3 pages worth of CVs, it's like too long. And also, if you are writing to a specific company, phone up and find out who you should address the letter to. Because seriously, if you put dear sir or madam, it goes in the bin. You need to find out who in the company you should be writing to. And you phone any production company, they'll happily tell you who to write to. And that's the important thing.
I saw you nodding along there, Clive. Have you got any bits of advice?
I wholeheartedly agree. Never write to whom it may concern on a job application, dear sir or madam. Take the time to find out who it's going to. Never lie on a CV or never lie in an interview. To put this into perspective, when Joe and I were general managing Lend Me a Tenner the musical, we were interviewing company managers and stage managers, because we had a large team. So we had CSM, SM, DSM, 3 ASMs, and we were interviewing the top of the team. CV. This industry is so small in some respects. People can always, by making a phone call, check up. You can have an interview and someone will go, hang on a minute, I need to check this, and you take a reference. And it may be that if you've said something that's not particularly true, you might have chosen to ask their referee, and their referee says that's not right. Choose your referees carefully. Your referees we do ring them up if we don't know you. We do ring them up, and sometimes your referees might not be as nice about you as you think they are. It's certainly happened to me. I lost a job once many years ago because somebody I thought was a good referee for me said I wasn't quite made out for the particular job I was going for at the time. So that taught me a lesson. I agree with Joe. I've just recently had to do my CV, and putting 42 years into 3.5 pages is too long. So I've got it down now to bullet point headings and just a description. Just to quickly show you, it happens to be here because I have to have it next to me because I don't remember what I've done now. Certainly in the early career. But yeah, the layout of the CV, it needs to be clear and easy to read so that we can pick out information quickly. It should have at the top of it, bizarrely, people that forget this, your name and address and your phone number and your email. That's very important on a CV. That tends to be forgotten by some people. Your referees and their current contact details. We haven't got the time sometimes to check up. People move around offices. Make sure the current phone numbers are correct for your referees, so we can check them quickly if we need to. Sometimes when you come in, we will know people that you know and you've worked with. We might shortcut your referees and call the person that we know you've worked with. It does happen, but it's a presentational thing. It's something we all have to learn. When I first started, CVs didn't exist.
It's
Literally,
also
you get phone calls.
useful, apropos of something Clive said, is if you're going for an interview, find out beforehand who's interviewing you and look them up, because then you can make sure you don't tell any lies.
Yeah.
Because if you look up the person who's interviewing you as to what they've done in their career, then you know what they've done, and it's very helpful.
There's something to be aware of in your career as well. IMDb, the International Movie Database, automatically puts on your credits, sometimes for theatre, mostly for television and film. Because I've worked in film, looked on IMDb the other day and was horrified that I am actually listed. My first job on IMDb that comes up at the moment is Look and Read, which I did one episode of in 1990, and it's there as for all to see. And I'm not House of Cards or EastEnders or anything else. It's Look and Read, and that appalled me. But you can edit everything online. Make sure that what Google yourself and you will pop up. Make sure what pops up is good to read. And if it's not, you can ask the people who've posted it, like Google or whatever, to edit it. And sometimes you might need to, because there are some not nice people out there, as we know. That people do edit Wikipedia. I haven't got a Wikipedia page, so don't look for me. But people do edit Wikipedia pages, and sometimes they're quite funny, not in the right way.
Thank you for that. You haven't got a Wikipedia page yet.
You are always as good as your last job, but your CV is hugely important.
Thank you for that. Richard, have you got anything to add?
No, I defer to the expertise here, but only that if you do get through to that interview, just it's a calmness under pressure. I sometimes think you can burst in. I know it's because you want to come across as knowing what you're talking about, and you want to come across as positive, but it can be okay, well, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. But maybe it's pausing and actually saying to that company manager or whoever it is who's interviewing you and saying, how do you see this team running efficiently? What did you do in your last job that you think worked well, or what did you like about that team? It just sometimes perspective, I think, is sometimes useful in an interview. Actually try and ask those questions from how that's what they see the role being or what they want to see, and then maybe giving some examples of how you fit that. And as you do move through, it is certainly, I certainly feel like as a producer, it's very, you can't not always responsible for employing people, but you can be responsible for not employing people. And by that I mean, in that tech period, in that time of opening a show, particularly the big ones, there is a lot happening at great speed, and it's very, very there's just an enormous amount going on, and I think always just remember that perspective of where you sit, and because often the energy's coming from a good place. You want to do this and want to do this, and at that point you think that what it is you want to achieve might be the most vital thing in the whole world from where you're looking at it from. But from the perspective of the whole show, and given that there are a number of things to prioritize, just take a breath and think about how it all looks like from all different angles. There's people fighting for time and space keenly in those moments, and a calmness under pressure and a perspective can be very useful to you.
Absolutely correct. That's sets and things have got bigger and bigger as the years have gone on and more complicated. And Joe and I looked after Lend Me a Tenner, which we've spoken about a lot. The set for that weighed 10 tons. The stage had to be acro-jacked and made stronger, and it famously had a scene change all of its own that got a round of applause at every performance. But to make that happen, there were 13 people in a chain of command, and yes, somebody had to ultimately press a button to make it all work. But one night the ASM said there's a I was listening in on cans as I did sometimes, because I still enjoy the job I was trained to do, and someone said there's a paper clip in the track, and they delayed by 30 seconds when one of the dancers went back on and picked out the paper clip so that the whole scene change would happen, as opposed to grinding to a halt. And stage managers that you all are will know what happens when everything grinds to a halt. Ultimately, it ends up with somebody on a microphone making a speech, or as I would always do, appear in person and make a speech. It's much better to appear in person. If you're going to apologize to an audience, never leave it too long. 20 minutes is far long enough to sit in an audience waiting for a show to start. Go out and make the speech in person. They will love you for it. They don't like a microphone. and always say the right name of the theatre. I'm famous for it, and so is Nick Bromley. If those of you know, Nick Bromley is a legendary company manager whose front of house announcements were always live and always very, very funny. He once asked people at the Prince Edward Theatre to turn off their mobile homes. He once was announcing an understudy, and crazy for you because of the way it was set up. He did it live on a microphone, not in person, which he hated. And he said, owing to the indisposition of Miss So-and-so, the role of Miss So-and-so will be played by the blonde one on page 16 of your programme, because he dried. Got a huge round of applause, and when she first arrived, they stood up and clapped her. So there is humour to be had in this industry.
Oh, thank you.
Great stress.
Thank you for those words of wisdom, and thank you for that story. That's wonderful. We're moving on to our last couple of questions, just as we see the time ticking down. Something a bit more current, and I think probably something everyone's a bit nervous about, is that when hiring for work resumes, do you guys think that those with less experience, which unfortunately are often those students and graduates, will struggle to find work? And from this, what do you think students and graduates can be doing now to upskill themselves as we have this time and these resources? I'm going to allow any of you three to start, whoever wishes to begin.
I would say use your time at the moment, as none of us are working. I've done quite a few webinars. I've done quite a few training things. I've reread books about the industry and learned things. You never, ever stop learning in this industry. When you stop learning, give up. You learn something every day in this industry. So take the time to grow yourself. If you want to move into sound, talk to some sound designers. They always want people to help out. You know, go and help somebody. If you've got the time, God knows not all of us can afford to do it, but you can go and help them in a fit up. Go and do a fit up with somebody. Ask to go in and see something. When the industry starts to work again, if you haven't got a job, ask if you can go in and chat to the company manager. Get a tour around the theatre. I went for a very lovely tour around the Theatre Royal Drury Lane 3 weeks ago, which is undergoing a £171 million refurbishment. It is magnificent. It is a theatre for the 21st century. It used to be a 1922 auditorium in an 1871 building. It's now a theatre fit for use, and you will all love working for it. They are going to do some public tours in December and January. They will be online from the Theatre Royal Drury Lane website. They'll be free. Go and have a chat. Go and have a walk around the theatre. You might meet somebody in there that you know. You might meet somebody that you bump into and have a chat with that will remember you. That's the way to do it. Never stop learning. Take the time to do it. I do think that when the industry starts up, you will all apply for jobs, because we don't always employ well-known people. It's nice to have new people on teams.
Well, thank you for that. Joanne, have you got anything to add?
Not really. I think that there will be some problems starting off, but I think that if you are able to do it, offering to do some intern work, to do shadowing on a show, to working in one of the fringe theatres in London or out of town, just to get some experience is really worthwhile. I know it's difficult, and you may be having to do a second job at the same time to make ends meet, but it's as you'll meet people, you'll get to know people, you'll get to learn things about the industry, and any experience is just really useful.
Just to quickly add that it's when I was company managing in the West End, I worked on Joseph for Bill Kenwright for 3.5 years at the New London, now the Gillian Lynn, and we didn't have an extra. These days, stage management normally have an extra person around so people can have their required days off. This was in the days before that, so we had a team of trainee students and people who wanted to get into the industry who wrote into us, and they came in and depped. So they did. The rule was that they came in for 3 shows, of which we paid them for 1. And then they would go onto a rota and they would come in and do the show when we needed them. And sometimes doing 3 shows a day on a Saturday in the West End of Joseph and 12 shows a week, we needed quite a lot of stage management, and we had different people in all the time from a roster of about 6 people. One of those is now the production stage manager of The King and I, the show that Joe general manages. And we reconnected by Zoom during the lockdown. and he's had a fantastic career. But he came in of his own accord to learn how a show with automation and a huge chorus and a band worked, and he's made a career in musicals. So take the opportunity. Write to company managers to see whether they have people that they need associate stage managers, or I've forgotten what they call them now. I think we call them associates. You don't get credited in the program, but you get to see how the show works. You learn how the show works. You meet people, and quite a lot of them, the people that came through the 3 years I was there, are now respected stage managers in the industry. One of them is a very big producer in ITV, doing the big variety and quiz shows. So you never know where you're going to end up, as I keep saying.
That's wonderful.
Take the time to learn.
Richard, do you have anything to add? Anything that students could be doing right now?
Well, I think certainly it's really important to not get disheartened. I mean, I think Joanne's completely right. I think it's going to be a very difficult year next year. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And you may be sort of thinking, you may be applying for stuff, trying for stuff, and you may be thinking, God, I want a job. Why am I not getting a job? Is it not for me? It is for you. This industry is for you, and you should feel like that. It is. But on the other side, there are going to be shows, production companies, big ones as well, who are opening in a market where there's not going to be tourists. It's going to be reliant completely on domestic audiences, probably on lower ticket prices than perhaps they were last year. And it will recover, and it will recover to get to the point as well quickly as well. I mean, I do feel even by 2022, but next year is going to be, it's going to be rocky, and there's going to be a lot of stuff. So if that's the case, then I'll agree with Clive as well. Is like, do take that time. You can take a journey around the internet. Find out what production companies are, if they're streaming something, if they're showing something, who directed it, who helped put it together. Did they have a stage manager even on the Zoom? Who was it? Can you write to them? Can you try and get 5 minutes of their time and speak to them and say, how are you finding it? It is a case of it does snowball. Work breeds work, and people do, you do meet people along the way. And I think if that's the case, and it does take time, and you're having to do something else for a bit and to subsidize and keep yourself alive and things, then that's all right. It's a long journey, and don't feel that that's just means that there's no place for you here. There is, and it will be all right. But it's just it's going to be a thing.
The industry has been through tough times before. In the 80s, Manchester was shut. I was working at the Oldham Coliseum in 81. The Palace, the Opera House, the library in those days, and Wythenshawe, which is now gone, were all shut. There was no theatre in Manchester. We were the only theatre in the area. Gradually, they reopened, and they're now hugely, hugely important venues, all of them. So don't despair. It will return, but it might take a while, and just reinvent yourself.
And on that wonderful sentiment, that was our final question. So I think I can speak for everyone to say thank you so much, all three of you, Joanne, Clive and Richard, for taking your time to answer all the questions here.